Hi everyone. Wasn't seeing a lot of Tiger 800 modification videos out there, so I put together my experience and mods on my 2017 XCX. ADVrider.com and TriumphRat.net have good threads that I'd encourage you to check out, but they're usually around specific mods and sometimes get hijacked into other topics. Also, for maintenance advice, I'd highly recommend checking out the Muddy Sump series here on YouTube, who's done a nice library of videos on Tiger maintenance. I also discuss a bit on some of the things I think could be improved on the bike's design. First, a bit more about me, how and where I ride. First, I'm not tall. I'm 5'8", so seat heights on some of the other middleweight ADV machines out there, like the KTM, Honda, and even the BMW, are higher than I prefer. Off-road seat height isn't really an issue. You don't really want to be planting your feet when you're off-road on a 500-pound adventure bike, so as long as you can dab a foot down here and there, you're fine. It's more around town and in traffic that I don't want to be sliding off the seat to get a foot down. I'd say anyone that's 5'5" or 5'6" is fine to ride a stock height Tiger, but everybody's preferences are different. I do have a low factory seat. More on that later. There is an XCX low version, but you give up a bit of suspension travel, so it's a compromise if you plan to do anything tougher than fire and gravel roads. You might lack some clearance to get through the technical stuff. On the suspension, being a 2017 XCX model, it came with a WP suspension stock. While it may not be as good as the WP setup on the KTM adventure models, it's still pretty darn good for how I ride, particularly in the front. I weigh about 160 pounds and run soft bags, so if you're heavier, run loaded with hard panniers, or ride 2 up, your experience may be different. If you ride like a Baja racer, you're probably either revalving and respringing, or riding a different bike. These bikes are quite capable off-road in stock form if you add decent tires. Yes, the KTM is going to carry its weight better off-road, have better suspension and geometry, but they probably trade off some street manners in the process. Yes, a 950cc and up engine is going to make a bit more power, but the 800cc triple gives plenty of usable power with a flat torque curve. So you're not hunting for the right gear all the time. You can pretty much do 0 to 60 in third if you really want to. I think part of the gap in perception about the Tiger's off-road potential is that many riders with serious off-road experience that aren't looking for a 1200cc plus BMW GS style bike gravitate towards brands with off-road history like Honda and KTM. And great riders ripping over insane tracks make the difference look even larger than it might actually be. All of these middleweight adventure bikes are surprisingly capable off tarmac, but rider skill and confidence is a big factor. I ride all over the western U.S., but most of my riding is in southern Nevada, southern California, and northern Arizona, so my setup's focused on that environment. Most of my trips are at least half pavement, with the rest being anything from graded dirt and gravel up to 2-track that gets rutted up from side-by-sides and 4x4s. Some of these are sections of backcountry discovery routes. I do my best to avoid long stretches of deep sand, but that says more about my skill level than the bike's. I've only been riding for a few years, so I'm still building my skill levels and confidence. I also plan to take some off-road specific training to improve my riding. Some of the shots you're seeing are Christmas Tree Pass near Laughlin, Nevada, and Ash Meadows Road near Pahrump, Nevada. Okay, let's get started. First, let me say that with all these add-ons and modifications, I make absolutely no guarantee they're safe. Modifying a factory machine could result in damaging something on the machine, or cause the machine to handle poorly, resulting in crash. Just because you saw it on YouTube doesn't mean it's safe. So any changes you make to your bike are your own. On the front end, I'm currently running a stock rim with a Continental TKC 80 tire. I run these with heavy-duty IRC natural rubber tubes. I run the knobby because in the Southwest you do run into loose rock, gravel, and sand, so I like the stability of the knobs. I think the idea of a 90-10, 50-50, or 10-90 ratio on tires is kind of silly. What you really need, in my opinion, is the tire that will handle the most difficult terrain you're likely to encounter. So if you're a 90% street rider, but that other 10% is deep sand or mud, a street-biased 90-10 tire isn't what you need. Keep in mind, the more you go towards a dirt-biased tire, such as an MT21 or D606, the quicker it will probably wear out. And you may get worse road manners, including head shake. To me, the TKC 80 up front gives a good balance of on-road and off-road manners, with me doing some longer highway stints to some areas. If you're doing a trip like a BDR, we will be doing mostly off-road for 500 plus miles, you may want to get a bit more aggressive up front. Just make sure you're okay with the handling at speed on some wet pavement. Now, I mentioned the stock XL rim, which I believe is 2.15 inches wide. I may at some point swap to a 1.85 inch wide rim, which could make it handle a bit better off-road, as it pulls in the sidewalls and rounds out the tire face a bit more than stock. For details on that, I'd suggest checking out the website for Woody's Wheelworks. They have good info on changes they suggest to customers and why. If I go this direction, I may have them do the work, as they're highly regarded and can respoke the new rim in a way that adds strength over stock. I run IRC heavy-duty natural rubber tubes because some riders report that natural rubber tubes hold a patch better. But I carry a spare because there's no guarantee a puncture is going to be patchable anyway. What can happen here in the desert is you get some cactus spikes in your tire, and if you don't make sure you get all those spikes out that are coming through the tire carcass before you get the new tube in, that spare tube is going to go flat before long too. Next up, you'll notice the gap between my front fender and tire. The stock mudguard sits extremely close to the stock tires. Add a knobby and there's even less space. You can get or make risers to lift this, but if you lift it too much it will hit up under the beak at full compression, which may be more likely if you have aftermarket upper crash bars. My problem with the fender design is that the gap at the back is wider than the gap at the front, and there's a huge amount of space up in the center between the fork legs. This area can collect mud and rocks and anything else the knobby throws in there. I don't ride much in mud, and FYI, the TKC80 does cake up pretty easy. I usually run between 26 and 32 psi. If I ran softer, it would probably clear mud better. So what I did is cut the front tip of the mudguard back an inch or an inch and a half. This dramatically adds to the amount of extra space. Now I'll often have small rocks riding the knobs come shooting out the front. Happily, none have come up in my face. They seem to stay low and come up in an angle. A hacksaw or a rotary tool will let you do this mod with the fender still on the bike. Just cover the tire with some cardboard and rag so you don't cut into it. This cut may result in more spray coming back to you if you ride in a lot of rain, but not much of an issue for me here where I ride. This mod also may not be the prettiest, but that's not what I was going for. Just to break up all the black, I've added some WP graphics off Amazon. I also pulled off the stock reflectors and added some silver reflective tape instead. Some jurisdictions technically require reflectors, so this keeps it legal, but I did it because I think it looks nice. I'm still on the original brake pads up front, but they're almost gone, and I'll probably replace them with some EBC centered pads as I've done in the back. I'm mixed because I like the grabby brake in the back, so I can break the back end loose. But I like the softer feel in the front because I don't like having the front end dive sharply under hard braking. I also run the front compression, that's the white clicker, a bit stiffer than I otherwise would. To remember which is which when tuning, red is on the right, is the rebound. I usually run the rebound one click faster than the compression. To me, it keeps the front end a bit more level through quick repeat hits like washboard. Up over the headlight, I'm running a Lexan headlight guard from AltRider. It works well and is easy to pull off to clean behind, but there's also enough space that you don't really often have to pull it off. Just slide a rag in behind. You get a bit of headlight reflection riding at night, but nothing I find distracting. On the windscreen, I modified the angle by designing and 3D printing my own brackets, which also house the front turn signals. Prior to the 3D printed brackets, I was using a couple stainless steel L brackets that I was able to find in a gas grill rebuild kit cheap at Home Depot, and these worked fine, but the turn signals were angled down a bit. This mod does a few things. By tilting the windscreen forward, it adds a bit more wind protection. It also adds space to mount your phone or GPS without blocking the instrument display. I designed my own bracket for mounting the GPS as well. You should be able to ram ball mount that clamps onto the center bracket for the windscreen. If I recall, it's a bit under a ½ inch in diameter. I relocated the turn signals here because in their stock location they're basically landing gear and a tip over. To allow return to stock, I left the stock wiring in place and made up a set of pigtail wires with the stock male connectors going to the radiator sides and the female connectors routed up behind the headlight. The Fry's Electronics store me had these 0.093-inch series Molex connectors in stock. The part number for the kit was 1619PRT, and it includes more than you need of both the male and female connectors and pins. In the fairing, I just cut out an oval from some black neoprene padding and glued it in place to seal things up. I also have a small wind deflector added to the top of the windscreen. I cut this out of Lexan and added a few small spring clips. It's a bit ragged, but on long trips it adds a bit more wind protection and it takes 2 seconds to pull off. As a bonus, I use the clips to hold receipts or camping passes temporarily when I'm registering for a campsite or in a park where you need to display a receipt when exiting. Moving up to the handguards. The stock plastic guards are really just wind protection. Off-road, they're not going to do much in a tip over. I'm running Barkbusters VPS, which have the aluminum backing. I'll leak these, but there's several good options out there. For levers, I picked up some shorty levers off either Amazon or eBay. Make sure you get the XCX compatible levers. The XCX clutch has a lever boss underneath that contacts the clutch switch. If you don't read carefully and you get the wrong levers, things like cruise control and your fuel gauge won't work. Yeah, ask me how I know. Free returns are a good thing. The short levers are much better off-road because if you're using 2 fingers on the lever, the long levers may contact your ring and pinky fingers when pulled in. On your handlebars, you'll probably want to rotate them forward a bit, which makes standing more comfortable by raising them. It also angles the levers down so your wrists are in a better position to use the levers while standing. Your levers can also be moved independently to get your setup tuned in. I'm not running risers on the bars, but the steering stabilizer did add a bit of height to the bars, about 3/4 of an inch. More on that in a minute. I pulled the stock mirrors and replaced them with an $18 set of foldable Enduro mirrors off Amazon. The stock mirrors will swing loose easily if you bump them, and they just flail around. The throttle side is also a pain to get a wrench on because it sits in between the switch housing and the brake fluid reservoir. I don't like that the mirror posts are connected to the levers because tilting the levers will tilt the mirror, and I was also worried that snapping a mirror off in a drop could damage the bracket that holds the levers. These foldable mirrors have better adjustment than stock. I don't usually fold them in off-road unless it's really rough. The mounts of plastic and could crack in a big hit. I've had one break over thousands of miles of off-road. I hit a wash going much faster than I should have been, and I would have been going slower if I had seen it. For the money, they're kind of disposable. I did replace the stock screws with thumb screws, so I can remove or tighten them without tools, rather than pulling hard on the mirror to fold it, which may have actually been why the original one failed. One of the things that's a known issue on the Tiger is the top nut on the steering stem can come loose. I had this happen, probably from riding a lot of washboard. If you're getting a clunk in the front end over small pavement bumps, it may not be your bearings, it may just be that nut. When this happened to me, I pulled everything apart, re-greased the bearings, and retorqued everything to spec. And it was indeed just the top nut causing the clunking. There's a special castle tool you'll need for nuts below that top nut. I bought one off eBay. There's also a special torque sequence to follow for seating things and then backing off the tension. Muddy Sump probably has a video on this. After you torque the top nut, mark its position so you can tell if it starts to spin out on you. I use whiteout from the dollar store because it's cheap and easy to clean off, but any marking paint works. You'll actually notice that all over the bike. I mark caliper bolts, handlebar alignment lines, axle bolts, and other items with a line of whiteout so I can see if anything's backing out or moving. It's handy in the field too because you're less likely to over-torque something if you can see where it was before you took it off.